Thank you very much to the ASD for inviting ERS to your fantastic conference. This is a brilliant idea, and I think it's something that we're going to take on ourselves. So, just a little bit of my background, because it's first time here. I'm a physiologist, I'm a consultant clinical scientist, so my background, my link to the ASD perhaps was my lung function in diabetes presentation at the ASD in Lisbon in 1989. I then got dragged into the Department of Medicine with George Alberti, Roy Taylor, and went down a sort of metabolic route for a while, and then saw the light and wanted a salary for the rest of my life, so went back into clinical physiology. So I've had various jobs in the UK, but my involvement at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, which is famous for Malala, the Nobel Peace Prize winner, we actually helped with her rehabilitation. It's actually put us on the map, which is very good. My involvement with the ERS is as an assembly head. I was on the executive for 3 years, and I've got this role now as the advisory editor to our buyer's guide, and that's the kind of link to medical devices which I've been asked to take today. So a little bit about the ERS, not dissimilar in size to the EASD. We think about 10,000 members and growing. We're going for a big surge in growth at the moment. It's in over 100 countries, way beyond Europe these days. And our conference has just topped 21,000 recently. We're kind of getting the #1 respiratory congress in the world at the moment. And our mission is identical to the ASD, I think, except you switch respiratory disease for diabetic management, I think. And our leadership is very, very similar, as most of these major professional bodies are. And our background is obviously the essence is the science, is the conference, is the papers, is the publishing, education and training of our medical and multidisciplinary team staff as well, the same as we see in diabetes. The international contact's very important, and advocacy in Brussels is one of our big growth areas. We have an officer for EU affairs, and this obviously links in. And perhaps most importantly is our European Lung Foundation, the patient wing of the ERS, who have a say around the table when it comes to medical devices. In fact, they have the biggest say, really. The assemblies are very broad-ranging, and I think a little bit unlike the ASD. We're covering a much wider scope of medical devices because it's everything from clinical day-to-day to intensive care to physiology, airways diseases, pediatrics, as well as surgery. And my role as the Allied Health Professionals representative was to put in the multidisciplinary team aspect to the ERS. So our devices are covering primary, secondary care, surgical and medical, and the range from home to intensive care and back again. So it's quite broad-ranging. How have we engaged with medical devices? Well, it's a little bit of a complex diagram, but we have the executive committee is kind of ruling what we're all doing. The scientific committee is where all the knowledge, the abstracts, the posters, the research, the investigations, the translational research goes on, and that feeds into the Congress. Now at the Congress we have a buyer's guide, which is our kind of directory to the exhibition. The exhibition's really vital in all our big European and international congresses, not only financially, but that's the interface between this innovation, the medical devices, and the practitioners that are going to give this to the patients, and that's really important. We have our website as well as the buyer's guide, so that's our link to these devices. And what we don't have is this kind of information about regulation, and that's something that I'm taking from this meeting to try and get ERS to do that. I invented the product of outstanding interest, the point process, to raise the profile of medical devices in our Congress, because for years pharmaceutical industries have had the big highlights, the big seminars, the big symposia, but the medical devices are sort of second cousin to all of that. So we're kind of promoting this product of outstanding interest to become part of the Congress and part of the whole link. Our buyer's guide's a hard copy guide to the exhibition, its website, and it involves the range of medical devices from diagnostics, and there's a huge range, both evaluation of lung function to other investigations, including bronchoscopies, to a lot of sleep medicine now, because we've discovered a few years ago that patients breathe during sleep as well. So Therapeutics, again, that's a broad range going right across all those assemblies. So it's quite a complicated picture, and we've got to cover a lot of the areas. The website, it's accessed daily. It's got this directory of information for our members. It reviews the sort of area of devices, so it might be CPAP machines, spirometers, or blood gas machines, but it's not utilised as much as we would like. And we're going to go for a revamp and change it to a respiratory equipment directory and help people to guide them on how to select the devices a bit more. Our product of outstanding interest session has really set the manufacturers on fire, and we're starting a dialogue over medical devices and innovation. And we have this process of selecting, submitted by the company's devices, the judges' selection, some finalists, and a session led by Vivienne Parry, one of the BBC health correspondents, who I suggest you get at one of your conferences. She's fantastic at facilitating sessions like this. And she really brings it alive and is sort of growing a momentum of our interest in innovation and devices much, much more. So that's really helped raise the profile. And the whole sort of focus is perhaps most on innovation, but patient comfort features in it, cost effectiveness, all the things we've been talking about this morning. And so that's why this regulation is so vital to us. We see the sort of link between development of a new device. There's a clinical problem. Somebody comes up, normally by research, with a new prototype. That prototype may, at the product of outstanding interest, be developed a bit, and it's a point there where it'll be highlighted. Once it's highlighted there, more people in the Congress will say, oh, I quite fancy that with some of my patients. Let's do a clinical trial, which leads on to research studies, which leads on to clinical evaluation. And as we have it now, probably on average, from a concept of how do we solve this problem to a product with a CE mark is anywhere 10 years, perhaps some, hopefully a lot less, but usually 10 years or more. So these are some of the devices. They're a complete random range, from ventilators in the bottom left to sleep diagnostics in the top part to all kinds of devices that clearly fall into all the different categories which we've been hearing about today. So let's just look at what our experience was. One of the best examples we have is the spirometer, the basic measurement of lung function. And so a new spirometer comes on the scene. A new prototype will be developed, and the ERS, using the membership, using the conference, using the journals, we actually get some good research presented and performed, so we see how it performs. That may then lead on to clinical trials, and again, that leads into conference for our posters and abstracts, or maybe symposia. We then have the clinical validation, again, more abstract, so the evidence is building, the scientific evidence which must back up all these wonderful, innovative ideas into something that means something clinically and benefit to the patient. And then we have our overall guidelines. Now, like EASD and ADA, the American Thoracic Society and the ERS a few years ago actually realized a lot of our standards are very, very similar. It's a very globalized market, so we're coming together more and more to have one standard for all, and that seems to work very well. And that's what all our manufacturers now build their equipment to in, for example, the spirometer field. We've also been able to develop our ISO standards, which means the whole of the world is affected, and that has got to be a good thing. So we can have global usage of the best devices with the best research to get there. There's some examples then, obviously, from the whole range of the respiratory area. The ones I want to focus on are the ones where we've got these ISO standards, and that's peak flow meters, very basic test, and spirometers. This is my colleague, Martin Miller, who's just retired recently from Birmingham, but he took to the peak flow meter device and realized in doing some very careful research that the scale was wrong based on fundamental principles way back when it was developed in the 1950s. And that difference actually made and distorted the clinical picture that was the essence of detecting asthma. That's pretty fundamental. Through the ARS, through Europe, we've been able to set that, or he's been able to set that standard. It initially came out as a European Commission standard and then ultimately went on, with good evidence behind it, to become an ISO standard. So we've been through the whole of this process. So we have been involved with it, even if we haven't been right in the centre of the negotiations of the development of the regulation. It's a very complicated process, and there's a lot of people involved, and is, as you can see, a very time-consuming process to do that. But I think it is the way to go to establish the standard. The difficulties that we've heard this morning is keeping up the constant vigilance and what happens when things change a little bit. These are standards for guidelines for lung function measurement. These are 5 papers, and the industry absolutely sticks to this. It's bumped on into clinical trials, so they all sign up to the same thing. So it really has helped to set an international standard of care delivery, but also technical standard for the medical devices. So I did mention that the peak flow meters then, that bounced on to the spirometers because they measure peak flow. And so we've actually got this process in place and would like to extend it more. So there's a parallel between EASD and ERS. Your glucose meter is our spirometer, the basic tool of fundamentally saying what's going on. The artificial pancreas and the ventilator, both essential life-saving therapeutic devices. So we do have an awful lot in common, and the same arguments and the same issues come up in the two organisations. So how has the new medical legislation, has it affected the ERS? Well, here's a capture of some of the issues we kind of have with it. Obviously, this pathway has been going on for a long, long time. It's not just recent, it's a general process that's gone on. And we've heard about a lot of the key steps that have happened more recently and the new approach that is now starting to come to fruition so many years later. And the other part which has been pointed out today is this is inevitable. This is a train. This is not stopping. It is going to come, as we've heard very, very clearly. So we have to embrace it, and we have to actually meet its challenges and make it work, because we owe that to our patients. So here's the 3 bits of legislation around medical devices, and in red I've highlighted some of the bits, anyway, I could think of, that would affect respiratory medical devices. So we cover all 3 categories. There are now some implantable devices for the diaphragm pacing. That's rare, but it happens. New treatments for sleep apnea by stimulating the nerves in the upper airway to keep the airway open at night involves an implantable device. And airway valves are used in the lung in emphysema, COPD. So we cover all those different areas, but I would say the majority is in the medical devices area. There is the question of the class rules, which are complicated, but the algorithm on the right I found on the internet, and I gave up after 3 triangles. I just didn't know where I was going with it. But I think John was right. If you follow it, it does make sense. And I think it's probably as close as you can get. But then you need to see where you actually fit in with your devices within that. Sorry for the Shakespeare quote. We made that one up at the bar last night. The other question that came up and we wonder about has been mentioned this morning, is this idea of a Euro FDA. I was very lucky to go to Maryland last year to actually be an expert witness for a device. And I was absolutely stunned at this massive, almost university-sized complex of all these buildings. We were in building 102. You know, this is a massive area. Do we want that? Can we afford that in Europe? I think the answer currently is no. But the concept of it, a virtual FDA, may be something that's more practicable amongst all the member states. Another issue that's becoming very evident, and you're probably well aware of it, is mobile apps. The mobile app as a medical device, if it was a medical device, be highly regulated. Because it's a computer app, it's little regulation, anybody can do it. The FDA has made a ruling on it recently, or last year, 2 years ago now, that diet and exercise information is exempt. So something like an insulin app that would then lead to the patient altering the glucose meter affecting the insulin dose, that would have to be regulated. So the question is really, or questions, look at the fast pace of app development. And the public are going to bypass the rules if we're not careful and start using these things almost very dangerously, if not fatally. And that's why this legislation needs to be enacted, and we need to get a grip of it. The melding of lifestyles and medical and consumer is all kind of overlapping. You know, the sports medicine drifts into cardiology, drifts into a bit of asthma. It's just becoming a real mess of things, but that needs to be very carefully controlled to protect patients and the public. But there is a great possibility for innovation at the same time, an argument we've heard just in the previous 2 talks. So respiratory medical devices, we have obviously the regulations around single use. We have a lot of CPAP masks for sleep apnea, non-invasive masks for ventilators, the mouthpieces, the nebulizers, all those kinds of things. There's that legislation. What is worrying is home CPAP machines for sleep apnea or non-invasive ventilators. There is actually very little control. Manufacturers can bring out a model of CPAP, have, as we've just heard in the last talk, 3 changes of the algorithm to something that isn't quite the same beast at all, and there's no regulation of that, no feedback of that, no knowledge of that, because it's all kept a little bit secret. However, if it was an intensive care ventilator, the regulation's really strict, so there's got to be a halfway house there. So the voluntary codes, we've got our ATS-ERS criteria. They're not mandatory, but everyone follows them because it's the right thing to do and there's no other better option. So potential future regulations. I'll look at the pros and cons at the minute. The pros are, yes, it's going to be safer for patients, or it should be most of the time. It's probably good that there is a centralised and standardised process. It will lead to more equality across markets, potentially. It'll encourage equipment validation and research to go on, so much more monitoring of equipment that's used over time rather than just a one-off or pre-delivery, a pre-launch type monitoring. More inspections and audit. Better unique device identification, which is the UDI system, which looks much safer for patients. And hopefully less manufacturer secrecy, much more transparency about what's going on. The downsides of this, of course, are safe and timely manner for new devices, hopefully, well, possibly. Does it stifle innovation? The current system, perhaps 3 to 5 years, is 3 to 5 years earlier than the FDA. So we've heard that argument. The FDA is coming to the Azores, and we're going out to meet them on a nice yacht. Is it the new legislation detrimental to medical equipment market capacity? That would be a great worry of EFTA, of the actual the manufacturing side of things. It's a very complicated process, and there is variable uptake by member states, which means it's still going to be very, very patchy. So there's some of the concerns that we've aired today, I think, already. So I'm going to take back from this excellent meeting, and lots more, I'm sure, this afternoon, tomorrow. Having a technology meeting like this is very important. We've had an ERS summit on medical devices, but I think something like this every year would be absolutely vital, and I can see the great benefit of that. We need to engage more with the manufacturers about the legislation and use our EU Affairs Office to engage, to influence these proposals before they're finalised. As we've heard this morning, we've got to make some changes to this to make it better rather than just allow it to go through. We'd like to extend our ISO standards for other equipment. We'd like to share approaches with other medical professional organisations, because working together, we have a much greater voice than just individuals, organisations coming one at a time. And obviously to work together on something like this, as we've seen today, is of great benefit. You guys will see a type 2 diabetic. I'll see a sleep apnea patient. But I don't want this legislation to be seen as the final bit that just blows it. You know, it's a horrible pitch. I'll move it on. Thank you very much indeed for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Brendan, for another excellent presentation. We've got time for 1 or 2 points or questions to Brendan from the European Respiratory Society. John.
Thanks very much. John Brendan again from MedTech Europe. I'm going to hijack a little bit to ask a question to the Commission, if I may. I loved the circle you created there about getting to the ISO standard, where I said earlier, standards really are the way of creating concrete safety. At the moment, the European Commission is blocking all publication of harmonized standards. They recently released some lists or whatever. Can you comment on the fact that you do all of this work to, secure safety from a clinical point of view, and then from how disheartened would you be if for some bureaucratic reason it can't be published and nobody knows about it?
Gutted. That would be just the worst thing, wouldn't it?
A comment here. We have to let you comment on this. Yeah.
So a comment from the European Commission then. We are not blocking all the publications of all the standards. What we are trying to make sure is that the guidance to industry on to which extent these standards satisfy the essential requirements is correct. Because this is the problem we have with one of the annexes, that sometimes they claim to provide for more conformity than what is correct. And this is a new duty for the Commission to control because of the new standardization regulation that recently entered into force. But we are working with the standardization institutions and with stakeholders such as COSIR that are very active in this, and we have found mechanisms for them and provided training. So we are on the way of solving the issues. Having said that, I think there is a fundamental problem with the standardization in this field because many of the standards are international, drawn up between industry and regulators in different parts of the world, and there is only they are to only some extent adapted to the European needs and the European regulations needs. And therefore I think there is a need to have more European industry and more European regulators involved in the standardization work. But this is not a subject for the conference today. I believe we can have a separate conference on that.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Brendan, for a lovely talk.